Hello students, today we are going to study socialization. We're going to try and understand what socialization is, what are the types of socialization, how does sociology try and understand the processes of socialization, and finally we are going to look at the various agents of socialization that exist in society. Now, what is socialization? Socialization is one of the key concepts in sociology that helps us to understand how societies actually function. It is a complex set of processes through which individuals learn beliefs, skills, practices, norms and values, standards of judgment, which enables them to perform social roles and carry out social responsibilities. Socialization is, of course, a lifelong process. It begins from the moment of birth until the death of an individual. It is a process by which a biological being is transformed into a social person who is capable of performing various roles in societies and which makes possible the smooth functioning of society. Now, socialization occurs at various levels. At the societal level, socialization determines how individuals come to cooperate and adapt to the various demands of social life in the various social institutions, from family to media to education. At the organizational level, it determines how newcomers to a social group are transformed into effective participating members. Now, what do I mean by this? So, say for instance, when students join a new college or university, they are given a set of rules and regulations that they have to follow as part of the institution. Again, at the personal level, socialization refers to the way in which individuals develop mental, emotional, and behavioral attributes that shape their personalities. So, this happens when they internalize the norms and values of society and shapes them according to the influences of society. Now, there are four fundamental types of socialization, namely primary socialization, secondary socialization, anticipatory socialization, and gender socialization. Now, these aren't watertight compartments, they are overlapping phenomena, and I'm going to discuss each one with you today. Primary socialization. Now, primary socialization is the socialization of the newborn individual. It has the psychological characteristics of primacy, which is that habits and beliefs that are learned at this stage are then difficult to change. And this is the foundation on which then other sort of values and norms are built upon by other institutions. Now, for primary socialization at some level, it is necessary that the newborn children, they do not have certain kinds of disabilities or deformities which can actually sort of make this socialization a more difficult process. It does not mean it is impossible, because today you have certain kinds of technology and various mechanisms by which children who are differently able are also adequately socialized. Now, how does primary socialization happens? It happens through basically observational learning and internalization of social and emotional norms and values. Now, the main institution which carries primary socialization is family. So, here the roles of parents, both father and mother, and in certain cases the extended family become very important in case of primary socialization. Now, what is secondary socialization? Secondary socialization is the process through which an individual is inducted into a specific social world. It always begins after primary socialization. It begins when the child enters social worlds of educational institutions, peer groups, and the consumption of media. So basically, the moment a child leaves the threshold of the family and enters the broader world beyond the family, that is when he is socialized to become a part of these institutions, and this is referred to as secondary socialization. So it includes all processes that help individual learn about the macro world beyond the micro world of the family. A child then realizes that he's not simply a part of a family, but he's a part of a society which is made up of various institutions, and that he has to perform certain roles and live up to certain behavioral expectations in these institutions beyond the family. Now, anticipatory socialization. The concept of anticipatory socialization was given by Merton and Kitt. They defined it as a process by which individuals adopt values of a group to which they aspire, but they do not belong to. It also includes social status, role gradations which individuals aspire to and are likely to attain. Now, what basically anticipatory socialization means is that you prepare yourself for the future in order to participate in certain social structures and social relationships in particular kinds of social institutions. So, for instance, at the formal level, it means organizations and schools that create a competitive environment, right, demand that you perform certain roles and statuses, right, and you prepare yourself accordingly for it. And at the informal level, what happens is that again your family members, your peers, your friends actually inculcate certain norms and values which prepares you for certain future roles. I think one example would be how in families women are continuously sort of told to learn housework, because housework is something that will be their responsibility even on marriage. So this insistence that girls should be capable of performing housework when required is a kind of anticipatory socialization for the future. Right? Now, anticipatory socialization then plays a key role in determining the choice of career and occupation that a child may choose in the future. The fourth kind of socialization, and a very important mode of socialization, is gender socialization. Now, gender socialization is the process by which individuals learn to become men and women, right? And this begins with the family. So, gender socialization is a part of both primary, secondary, as well as anticipatory socialization, because we are continuously being formed into men and women by various institutions. Now, how does this happen? It takes place through a variety of means and agents, and it involves the use of positive and negative sanctions. So, say children may be given certain kinds of rewards, or alternately they may be given certain kinds of punishments in order to ensure that they behave in gender appropriate ways. For instance, if you see boys crying, then boys would be told that generally boys do not cry, right? Likewise, if girls are playing with toys that are not supposed to be for them, then they are continuously asked to say, oh, this is not for you, this is for boys. So there is a continuous way in which men and women are taught gender roles in society, right from the family to all the other institutions that they are a part of. Now, what it does is that it generally tends to produce men and women as different, right? So generally women are produced as emotional, dependent persons, whereas autonomy, independence is associated with the boys. One of the psychoanalyst theorists called Nancy Chodorow, she has argued that generally this socialization takes place in terms of the attachment to the mother. But what happens is, at a certain point, the boy actually detaches from the mother, but the girl continues with her attachment. So what this does is that boys reject, in that sense, their dependence on maternal care in order to become more independent and cultivate a masculine self. They become independent, analytical, often keep their emotions repressed. Girls, however, continue to depend on their mother and seek for similar form of emotional dependence in the men they marry in future or have relations with. This makes them appear as emotional as opposed to men who are seen as more rational. Gender socialization, of course, continues in schools, among peer groups, workplace. While it starts at the family, it is something that takes place in all social institutions. Even media plays a very important role in gender socialization. Now, we are going to look at certain theories of socialization. We are going to try and understand three major theories of socialization, namely the functionalist, the symbolic interactionist perspective, and the critical perspective on socialization. Now, the functionalist perspective on socialization. It is provided by Talcott Parsons and Robert K. Merton. Now, they understand socialization as a process of role learning, which defines the ends to which individuals aspire and the means to achieve them. So, society tells you what should be your goals, what are the things that you should aspire towards, and what are also the socially accepted means of achieving them. Right? So, in this process, what they learn is to take on various roles, like the roles of a father, the roles of a mother, the role of a teacher, and so on and so forth. And this is what integrates individuals to the social whole. Now, it also entails internalization of these values and norms and processes such that the social world that exists outside the individual begins to become a part of the individual's consciousness. This happens from the moment a child is born in the family to his experience throughout in different kinds of institution. It entails an imprinting of cultural patterns on the personality of the child in order to ensure effective participation. Now, functionalist perspectives have been critiqued on two counts. Firstly, the idea that they treat society as though it exists over and above the individual. So, there is this idea that society is already there and individuals are simply expected to internalize the norms of the society and simply sort of, assimilate everything that society wants them to. So, what this does is that this makes individuals passive in some sense, which is that whatever they are told, they behave in that fashion. But that's not exactly how society works, because individuals also have agency. They may resist, they may reject certain forms of socialization. So, these are two important critiques that functionalist perspective assumes that society exists over and above the individual, and it does not take into account the agency of the individual to reject, to modify, or to resist certain processes of socialization. Now, the symbolic interactionist perspective. Now, the symbolic interactionist perspective has been provided by scholars like C.H. Cooley, John Dewey, G.H. Mead, Herbert Blumer, and Everett Hughes. Now, it emerged as a critique of the functionalist perspective, and it tried to sort of give importance to the individual role in learning the norms and values of society. Now, how does this happen? Now, according to symbolic interactionists, interaction is the process by which socialization takes place, which means as people interact with each other, that is when they learn the norms, values, and belief systems of society, right? And since interaction requires language, which means that then in this case, socialization takes place through the learning of symbols and languages. So, sense of self emerges from mutual construction of versions of reality through shared language, symbols, and signs. The process of socialization then helps us understanding one's own sense of self in relation to others around. Now, we're going to look at one specific theory of the symbolic interactionist perspective, which is the Mead's theory of the development of I, me, and the significant other. Now, when children are at play, they take the role of the other. The process of role taking makes them step in the shoes of another person and be able to view themselves through that other person. Right? So, say for instance, when children imitate their mothers or their fathers, right? Or sometimes, for instance, when they play with toys, they treat these toys as individuals and make them perform certain things. In that process, they also learn certain important behavioral codes of society. They are able to evaluate and interpret these perceptions in the light of shared attitudes and then develop a sense of me, which is different from I. So, here sort of Mead seems to be making a distinction between I, which is the unsocialized self, which is spontaneous, which is full of desires, and me, which is the social self, which is learned in interaction with others through the process of shared language. Individuals enter into an internal interaction with the individual I and the social me to adjust their actions accordingly in society. So, what you see, socialization seems to take place through a kind of negotiation between I and me, I being the personal self and me being the social self. Children's socialization largely depends on the values inculcated by the significant other. Now, who are the significant others? Basically, your family members. So, again, the primary socialization is very important in case of the socialization of a child, and it is central to the creation of the self of the child. Now, Mead also, however, talks about that beyond the family, of course, there is a world, and how do children learn to be a part of that world? As a child grows and learns values present in the society, he or she learns to relate to a generalized other. Now, the generalized other is basically a way of orienting to members of society, right? The child learns that particular attitudes and roles refer to a more general reality. Particular attitudes become universal. So say for instance, if the mother has taught the child that the child should not pee in bed, right? So he thinks that the mother does not like him from urinating. But as the child proceeds, he understands that urinating in bed is generally bad. So moving from the particular demands of a mother to the general demands of society is what happens through the process of socialization, right? The role of generalized other then can be taken in the school, workplace, peer group, state, etc., right? So again, the understanding that role taking which takes place with significant others happens at the primary level. That's one way of looking at it. And then the learning of the general norms and values of society happens as the child goes beyond the institution of the family and learns the rules and regulations that are prevalent in different institutions and is able to then orient himself or herself to the general rules and regulations, norms and values of society. Now, some of the critiques of the symbolic interactionist perspectives are that they tend to sort of ignore the biological aspect of a child's development, which means they do not address as to how far biology plays a role in individuals being able to cope with the demands of social life. It also sort of seems to assume that there is a kind of cooperation between I and me, between the personal and the social self. But scholars have shown that there are many instances where the personal and the social self do not cooperate. There is a kind of contradiction or a tussle in them, and this can be a problem. They also ignore, of course, the role of power and inequality in social life, in socializing processes, which means that how sometimes we are socialized in such a way that reflects the interests of those who are in positions of power, and it's not simply a neutral process of social learning. Also, of course, Mead's theory takes no consideration of the unconscious mind, which is basically sort of, the ways in which Sigmund Freud tries to understand how children learn the rules and regulations of society and become gendered in particular ways. So there is no space for unconscious processes, beyond our cognition, right, in the symbolic interactionist perspective. Finally, we have the conflict perspective, whose main proponents are Pierre Bourdieu, who's a French sociologist, and other Marxist and feminist scholars. Now, of course, it emerged as a critique to both the functionalist and the symbolic interactionist perspective, and it sheds lights on the role of sort of power imbalances and the reproduction of structures of inequality in the process of socialization, which is that, as we know, that society is made up of unequal aspects, right? There are various ways in which society is made up of differences that are hierarchized. So socialization then sometimes is a process whereby we learn to be unequal, right? So here socialization becomes a mechanism of social control. Social structures and agents of socialization are generally controlled by the powerful, hence socialization reproduces similar configurations of power in each social institutions. Now, we're going to look at one specific perspective, which is the Bourdieu's perspective on socialization. Now, according to him, Bourdieu defines socialization as the process of acquisition of a habitus. Now, a habitus is basically a kind of mental filter, right, which is ways in which individuals become habituated to the customary ways of behaving, thinking and feeling, which is common to members of a particular social world. Often, this kind of habitus is subject to or is a manifestation of the kinds of capital that a particular group has been able to accumulate. Individuals who share certain positions, right, economic position, social position, cultural status, tend to instill and inculcate patterns of subjective adjustment to external social conditions. For Bourdieu, educational institutions actually play a very important role in the reproduction of unequal structures, particularly unequal class structures. Now, how does that happen? Now, what Bourdieu says is that schools generally privilege cultural values and knowledge of the dominant class. which aids in making the upper class or middle class children succeed as they share similar habitus inculcated through family socialization. The habitus acquired by a working class student then does not translate to academic success. The working class students performs poorly and they struggle to adjust their aspirations and self-conceptions with the given dynamics before them in school. It also then hampers their success in getting better jobs in future, and the structure of class inequality is again replicated, right? Following this, we are going to look at the various agents of socialization. Now, the fundamental agents of socialization are family, school, peer group, mass media and technology, public opinion, religion, workplace, and the state. Now, family, as I've already discussed, is the most important agent of primary socialization. It actually teaches children language, acceptable gender norms, important values and norms, and their broader location in society, including religion, race, ethnicity, caste, and class locations. Early socialization takes place in the nuclear family in modern societies, and in traditional societies, it takes place in extended or joint families. Within family, the child encounters the significant other, like parents and siblings. Families also introduce children to the concept of division of labor on the basis of age and gender, again something that I've already discussed with you. Family is the institution where the child is informed of her habitus, as Bourdieu was talking about. They learn the various ways to perceive the world in a certain way, and it orients them to make their choices and decisions about their lifestyles in the future. School. Now, school is a very important institution of socialization, secondary socialization after the family. It is here that the child focus shifts from significant to the generalized other. Again, school is a place where a child encounters other students, like new faces, people who are not related to her, and hence she is able to learn the various norms and values of society. It teaches individuals from a young age an obedience to authority, being punctual, participation in group, not being absent or missing deadlines unless there is an emergency. So education then plays an important role in sort of also inculcating important notions of nationalism and patriotism. And as Bourdieu has mentioned, in a certain way, education also sort of promotes inequality because of the way in which it slots people of various class according to their habitus. Now, peers. Who are your peers? Peers are basically friends, people of similar age who you meet in the workplace, in educational institutions. Now, peers have a very important role in influencing an individual's choices and decisions, which is why you will often notice that your significant others, right, like your parents, are always worried about who your peers are. Are you keeping good company or bad company? Because the idea is that the peers influence your action, which is why they want you to be with people who have the right etiquette, norms and values, so that you're not influenced in a bad way, so that you do not do things which society does not want you to do. So from styles of dressing, perspectives and opinions on important social issues, standards of judgment, they're all determined by the peers one is surrounded with. A parent is always curious, as I told you, about the peer group of the child. Next is mass media and technology. Now, as you know that, we are all, we're surrounded by media, right? And it is continuously giving us information, right? Information of how to be, how to think, what to wear, how to eat, what to watch, right? So in this sense, the media plays a very important role in actually socializing us, right? A consumption of media portraying an ideal typical sort of form of heterosexual romance often raises an individual's expectations of future romance and marriage, which if not fulfilled, fills the individual with dread and a sense of failure. So here it's important to understand that, there are particular ways in which media sort of shapes us, right? It shapes us fundamentally as heterosexual people. It shapes men and women ready to sort of get married, have children, perpetuate society and transfer the norms and cultures of society from one generation to another, right? But at the same time, media is interesting because it also provides you images of resistance, right? Where things are done differently. It also gives you access to certain kinds of differences, right? So technology today has helped people from queer, disabled and other minority groups to meet people who go through similar forms of struggle and learn to cope and communicate their feelings to their respective families, which again brings us to the point that socialization is not always a complete process, that there are resistance and everybody does not sometimes sort of align themselves with the values and norms of society, and hence they find media an important outlet and also an important mechanism to actually create communities and support systems. Public opinion. Public opinion and discourses are important in formulating and changing perspectives of individual. Mass media again plays an important role here. So say for instance, as you know, recently there's a lot of talk about how social media has an important influence on how we perceive the world, how we perceive governments, how we perceive government action, how we understand certain individuals and their action, right? So media is continuously telling us how to think about certain phenomena, and in that way it continues to socialize us. Religion is also an important agent of socialization. I mean, if you think about it, religion is nothing but a set of norms and values by which its adherents have to abide by, right? So religion continuously tells you how to behave. So in that it socializes you, right? And religion provides you a moral code of conduct, right? Generally, religion is also an important source of gender socialization because religion reserves different roles for men and women, right? And religion tells you things like, what should be the size of the family, whether you can divorce or not, what kind of behavior is considered appropriate with what kind of relationships in what social institutions. It also informs, say, things like our eating habits or the kind of clothes we wear, etc. So religion is an important agent of socialization. Another important agent of socialization is, of course, the workplace, where you work. Now, the moment you enter a workplace, you know that you have to abide by the rules and regulations of the workplace, right? So as you start to abide by the rules and regulations of the workplace, you actually learn the norms and values of the workplace. And as you also know that modern work requires things like on-the-job training, right? So you're actually trained, you're given certain kinds of values, certain kinds of skills so that you can function effectively in the workplace. This also can be seen as a kind of socialization. Finally, the state plays, of course, a very important role in socialization because the state produces the laws. And what is law but a set of rules and regulations by which we have to accord, sort of our behavior, right? States define the modes, the rules and regulations a citizen has to abide by in order to be able to make use of these services. Important decisions like when can one drive, marry, retire, consume alcohol, occupy a particular space, share residence or travel are now in the hands of the state, and they are offered to only those who actually abide by the rules that are prescribed by the state. To conclude, I would like to say then, socialization is one of the fundamental ideas of sociology to understand how society and its institutions and relationships are reproduced across generations. Socialization is not a complete process. It is not a finished process because socialization can encounter resistance, and through this resistance there is possibility of cultural change, right? So if you're told, your parents tell you that you must marry, but then when, say, a girl who chooses not to marry but concentrate on her work over and above the family, you see, it's a resistance to a particular kind of norm. And this resistance can eventually bring about change when she may allow her children to make different kinds of choices which are slightly different from the dictates of society. Now, socialization is, of course, a lifelong process. It does not stop at a particular age. Adults also go through socialization in their everyday life till the end, right? So there is always the possibility of learning, relearning, modifying, right, and changing the norms and values of society. So this is the way in which socialization takes place, and it is absolutely fundamental to the way in which individuals behave and function in society. Thank you.